PBS Kids. You're watching Alaska Public Media PBS Kids. You're watching APT PBS Kids. You're watching Arizona PBS Kids. You're watching Arkansas PBS Kids. You're watching AZPN PBS Kids. You're watching Osage PBS Kids. You're watching Basin PBS Kids. You're watching Blue Ridge PBS Kids. You're watching WNED PBS Kids. You're watching KCTS Live PBS Kids. Watching PBS Kids. Watching PBS Kids. You're watching Dawa International Media PBS Kids. You're watching Delta PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids. You're watching GBH Kids. You're watching PBS Kids. You're watching Distant Public Media PBS Kids. You're watching Idaho PBS Kids. You're watching Idea Stream PBS Kids. You're watching Iowa PBS Kids. You're watching Gas PBS Kids. You're watching KCTS PBS Kids. You're watching Patty Public Television PBS Kids. You're watching KETC Public Television PBS Kids. You're watching KEDT PBS Kids. You're watching KEDT PBS Kids. You're watching KERA PBS Kids. You're watching KET PBS Kids. Watching KLRN PBS Kids. You're watching KMOS PBS Kids. You're watching KPBS Kids. You're watching KQED PBS Kids. You're watching KSMQ PBS Kids. You're watching KSPS PBS Kids. You're watching KTWU PBS Kids. You're watching KUAC PBS Kids. You're watching KVCR PBS Kids. You're watching Lakeland PBS Kids. You're watching Lakeshore PBS Kids. You're watching LTV PBS Kids. You're watching Maine Public Broadcasting PBS Kids. You're watching Milwaukee PBS Kids. You're watching Maryland Public Television PBS Kids. You're watching Montana PBS Kids. You're watching Mountain Lake PBS Kids. You're watching Nebraska ETV PBS Kids. You're watching WGBY PBS Kids. You're watching New Hampshire PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids. You're watching NJTV PBS Kids. You're watching NMPBS Kids. You're watching Northern California Public Media PBS Kids. You're watching NPT PBS Kids. You're watching KWSU PBS Kids. You're watching Oklahoma PTV PBS Kids. You're watching OPB PBS Kids. You're watching Ozarks Public Television, PBS Kids. You're watching Panhandle, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Charlotte, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Fort Wayne, PBS Kids. You're watching KGTF, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Hawaii, PBS Kids. You're watching WILL-TV, PBS Kids. You're watching KAMU, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kansas, PBS Kids.
You're watching PBS Kids, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids, PBS Kids.
Watching KLCS, PBS Kids. You're watching KBIE, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Michigan Kids. You're watching PBS North Carolina, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS V2.0, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS SoCal Kids. You're watching PBS Kids, Texas Tech Public Media. You're watching PBS Kids Utah. You're watching Western Reserve, PBS Kids. You're watching WHYY, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Wisconsin, PBS Kids. You're watching WKAR, PBS Kids. You're watching WUFT, PBS Kids. You're watching YA, PBS Kids. You're watching Pioneer, PBS Kids.
You can't even say it, okay? So
You're watching Prairie Public, PBS Kids. You're watching Rhode Island, PBS Kids. You're watching Rocky Mountain, PBS Kids. You're watching Roma Media, PBS Kids. You're watching South Carolina, PTV, PBS Kids. You're watching Seti PBS Media Kids. You're watching Smoky Hills, PBS Kids. You're watching South Dakota, PTV, PBS Kids. You're watching WMTJ, PBS Kids. You're watching South Florida, PBS Kids. You're watching WSCL, PBS Kids. You're watching Southern Oregon, PBS Kids. You're watching Dink TV, PBS Kids. You're watching WAET, PBS Kids. You're watching Twin Cities, PBS Kids. You're watching Valley, PBS Kids. You're watching Vegas, PBS Kids. You're watching Vermont, PBS Kids. You're watching Vincent's, PBS Kids. You're watching WPBA, PBS Kids. You're watching WBTU TV, PBS Kids. You're watching WCNY, PBS Kids. You're watching WEDU, PBS Kids. You're watching WDIU, PBS Kids. You're watching West Virginia Public Broadcasting, PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids. You're watching WITF PBS Kids. You're watching WNIN PBS Kids. You're watching WOUB Public Media PBS Kids. You're watching WPBS PBS Kids. You're watching WQED PBS Kids.
That's for him.
You're watching WQPT Quad Cities PBS Kids.
We've just been.
You're watching WSIU PBS Kids. You're watching WSKG PBS Kids. You're watching WXRU PBS Kids. You're watching Tennessee Valley PBS Kids. You're watching WPIU PBS Kids. You're watching WTTW PBS Kids. You're watching WTTW and PBS Kids. You're watching WTDP PBS Kids. You're watching WUCF PBS Kids. You're watching WXXI PBS Kids. You're watching Wyoming PBS Kids. You're watching New Orleans PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids.
Until 8:30.
You're watching PBS Kids. You're watching PBS Kids.
Gotta
You're watching PBS Kids.
go to the car because it's 7:30.